Good morning to you, my friends, wherever you may be in the world today. Today is October 7th, 2021. I'm here in Hawaii, the occupied islands by the United States of America. Welcome to my podcast, my daily live stream. As I see it, an extemporaneous sharing primarily as a self-therapeutic process to just keep engaging and moving through the complexity, the challenges of the day of life, of embodiment. Equally, a calling out, a sharing to meet friends and family and new people in the heartland of time and digital space across the continents, around the globe. Thank you for being a part of my life. Today's sharing combination of titles, abiding in nature and our own nature as well, and then some. It's not as if I know what nature is. Obviously, we're all a part of it, inseparable from it. No matter where we stand, walk, talk, lie, talk, interrelate, we are embedded in, for good or worse, nature. Human-generated urban nature, nature, God's nature, complexity of nature, earth, water, fire, air, rhythms, frequencies, photons, consciousness, form, galaxies, dimensions. We're embedded in this nature. I don't want to spin that as something like mind-blowingly remarkable. It's even more miraculous than remarkable. But today, as I was walking this morning on the shoreline here in Hawaii, on Maui, another glorious day in the life of planet Earth. The challenge of being alive, breathing, walking, deciding. And I'm walking down the beach, dropping in through the layers, the conditions, the narrations of time, of hope, of arrival, of departure, I dare even say of life and death, of aging, of complexity, and just, Alan, occupy your movement, the movement through nature. I don't know if you ever do this at times. And I began to feel, as I'm feeling right now, the air, the invisibility, the oxygen. I can't even imagine for a moment not having an in-breath and the ability to exhale. The quality of the oxygen and how deeply for granted that instinct is re-inhabiting itself, reaffirming itself, breath after breath, independent of my volition, your volition. And I'm just letting air and light and radiance and luminosity and the spectrum of color through the rainbow and the rain and the water and the waves and the granules. I just stopped for a minute and just felt and looked and imagined the sand granules, so many billions and trillions and countless, gazillions of these granules on this one beach. How deep do they go? And then of across the oceans and on all shorelines and all riverbanks and wherever granules of sand are. There's just how many, and they're all separately interrelated, connected, lying in some kind of strange, jagged conformity, uniformity with one and another in the air and the molecules and the photons and the oxygenation of air through my blood and the brain and the lungs and the kidneys and all the various things going through nature. Intersecting intelligence is called life. Nature, a set of intersecting intelligences that we call life. And there I am walking, trying as best as I possibly can to let nature be its own healer, be its own guide, be its own resource in breath, walking through nature. And just attuning to nature being the attunement to a restoration, if you will, of its nature. Not healing, not fearing, but letting nature, this lightness, this oxygen, this water, this sand, these molecules, the DNA, the substratum, the infinity of wonderment, the plants, the trees, the waves, all of it, just this interconnected matrix without centrality. And I'm going in breath, out breath, relax, walk in and through the restorative power of nature and your own nature too. And there was something, I don't want to be exaggerating of this, but something quite restorative, something very nice about occupying this movement through the innate healing properties, restorative properties. I was just like in this state of trust, taking all discernible stress out. Drop. The wind isn't in stress. The water isn't in stress. The sand isn't in stress. These conditioned formations inherent in the substratum that play themselves through the rhizome of being embodied in consciousness, in context. And we have these complexities, and I was, these complexities. And just as I was walking through this reflection of timelessness, there was a dog running behind me and down the beach, and another dog behind this dog, chasing a bird who was just gliding along the waves, close to the shoreline. But the dogs noticed the bird, and the dogs were unable to get the bird, but they were running faster and faster, and the bird was just gliding and moving through time and space, and I was just watching the dogs act in their own nature. And I feared for the bird because there was no land, and I feared for the bird being captured or killed, and all of a sudden through inference and extrapolation I realized that the instinct, perhaps it's some projection, to violate, hostility. I perceived that the animals wanted to kill the animal. And I imagined that hostility through time and space and nature all around the planet, all throughout history, if you're with me, all configurations, all wars, all massacres, all rapes, all tortures, all degrees of hostility. Pause right now, I'm thinking, feeling that through this infinity of time and space and oxygen and water and sand granules and multidimensionality, there are these currents which really drew me. I reflected as I paused there, reflected and drew me into the teachings attributed to the Buddha of the Four Noble Truths, that if you are not aware and you project in the illusion of going from here to there with the hope of an attainment, and that desire system compels you through time and space to an object, it's very easy to miss the context of nature and the true characteristics of this nature, the true characteristics of this nature that include the beauty of the rainbow, of time, of space, and equally, as someone else was walking down the beach, strangely, and I don't judge this person for that, they were smoking a cigarette in breath, nicotine, out breath, exhalation, in breath, nicotine, out breath, exhalation, in breath, nicotine, reducing stress, increasing stress, out breath, exhalation, and multiply that times every automobile, every airplane, every bus, every motorbike, every taxi, every form of electrification on this pulsing planet, smoking the nicotine of consumerism, in breath, in this great expanse of nature invenerated with these conditions that seem to denigrate if one isn't aware of their participation in these denigrating theme streams inherent within nature. And I began to walk more gently and more intensely through the reflection and went right back into Alan. Back into the ease of stressless present time walk through nature. And that choice, I began to see that choice was something very beautiful that I had been honing over decades. And I was so grateful that I had access to a state of mind called mindful intelligent choice. That I had the ability at that time, it may not last, to inhabit a more refined, easy flow of these intersecting intelligences. And I'm going like, why and how? What do you call this? And I'm saying, this is the abiding in the refuge of Dhamma within the context of intersecting intelligences. Nature is a set of intersecting intelligences. The tides and the lights and the orbits of the earth around the sun, and the sun in a solar system, in a galaxy, and the birds flying based upon their biological imperative, and the dog chasing them based upon their own instincts. These instinctual currents, these conditions, these conditionings, and drop into, I have a choice to be stress free. Are you hanging with me? I'm just sharing my own internal process as I felt it in my own process of memory based upon my walk this morning. It's become a bit of a sacred ritual, if you will, not just at all for exercise or metabolism increase, but this new restorative sense of letting nature purify, give back, regenerate, restore. I dare use the word heal, elevate, illuminate both the biological nature of being, the cognitive processes of consciousness, and abide in these intersecting intelligences. So the last half of the sharing today, I want to just point out in my own simple way how I go about the business, the Dharma business, of occupying the experiential nature of being embodied in consciousness in context. What does it mean to meditate as a way of being rather than a simple way of sitting or of observing your breath or of cultivating mindfulness? If there's one thing that I keep coming back to, for me, as a way to inhabit more and more of an anxiety-free heart. There's something about that today that has become an increased form of intensity. Transforming conditioned occupation in narratives that result in stress, anxiety, self-diminishment, and overall existential hardship. And one of which, as the basis of being, is the distinction between direct experience occupying the nature of the physical sensations of the body and the cognitive properties of the mind, the poetic of mind and body, the natural flow, if you will, of these intersecting intelligences, and discerning as much as possible the intimate, direct reality of living, and how to occupy that direct reality of living in conformity, if you will, to the characteristics that govern it, so that we occupy a relationship of truthfulness, in dignity, in conscience, in freedom, reality meeting reality rightly. My sense is that through wrong views, wrong conditioning, wrong narratives, we intercept reality and project into that reality things that don't exist, and that gives rise to what's known as greed, fear, anger, stress, anxiety. And for example, walking on the beach this morning, I'm just looking at the countless trillions upon trillions of sand granules. And there's no centrality to the sand. It's a beach of particles. And I'm thinking, how many times have I heard in my Dharma life that beingness, consciousness, self, identity, existence, all forms are a conglomeration of particles in an interrelated, non-central configuration that give rise to this phantasmagorical existential charade, the illusion of separateness. What holds this separateness together are configurations of what are known to me, in my humble estimation, are known as the kilesas, bonding qualities of consciousness that congeal and contort and denigrate self and other. They contract, the physics of contraction, of myopia, of narrowness. What is anger? Radical narrowness with the projection of violation, and therefore the righteousness of a disagreeable state of mind that condemns the so-called object. And right there we live in the conformity of an anger tunnel. And if we want to live our lives in that anger tunnel, that is our choice. And if we want to free ourselves from that anger tunnel, we can dissolve the conformity to the illusion and see it as simply a fabrication in the cinema of consciousness. It does not exist in reality except as a configuration of conditions like sand granules within consciousness, molecules of light in the atmosphere, water, photons, all the various ways of subatomic particles without configuration to centrality, and all of a sudden we dissolve the very thing that brings anger, self-attachment. And I'm walking down the beach, just giving up self-attachment, abiding in nature and one's own nature and some more. Always including in the process a deeper insight. So, embodiment. Very rare are we gifted to abide. Just hang out in unhurried spaces, taking that compulsion out of consciousness that is forward moving, the neurotic momentum of the next. And it was very easy for me this morning to see that I was walking in a direction. But then I took, as much as I could, the anxiety of time and duration and location and destination out of consciousness. And it dissolved. This issue of anatta, or non-centrality, is also about directionality. It's about destination. It's about I going forward in time. And you take those configurations out of mind, which are just illusory forms of identity. Life doesn't know what time it is. The clock is within one's own mind, and those of us who do abide more in a desire for a directionless timelessness that takes death and destination and fixation out of the configuration of being, we're learning, I feel, to live in the flow of nature. It's so fascinating to walk on the beach, and how it's, I want to use the word triggering, but it's not, that's too jarring. It's inspiring of, what's the word, it's inspiring of insight, and I dare say epiphany. And I've been looking at various ways in which I go about the so-called business of healing and increasing my health, until I realized today that my natural instinct is to abide with shoes off in the elements where I am most poetic, where I am most alive. And I've realized that I'm taking the stress out of these hours walking on the beach. And it's, wow, okay, you're giving up in this process the conditioned narrations of identity, of healing, of illness, of death, of hospice, of fear, of time, of hope. I don't know whether or not you have restorative, really truly restorative practices that you do, but there's something about abandoning the occupation within the walls, both metaphorically in the house and in consciousness, and to put our insight, put our wisdom, put our freedom, put our deliberate mindful intelligence into dynamic transformational action by the practice of abiding in nature and our own nature as well, and then some. And I don't know if that really touches something in you, if you are giving yourself that true natural gift of restorative light. Stop yawning, stop napping, stop feeling so tired, feeling this carefree sense of dignity, a sense of a reinvigoration of trust, but most of all, the absence of anxiety, the absence of stress, the absence of fear by inference of seeing that I am in nature all the time, moving and not holding, being in flow without grasping, and allowing the light, the air, the water, the molecules of time, and the trust in the innateness of the healing elements of light and water and earth and wind and the grace of God and the existential hands that we're all held in, trusting that I'm in flow, giving myself the prayer of occupying the restorative power. That's what it is, of nature. Go out in nature. Walk in the forest. Walk in the parks. Lie down on your back with a blanket or without one. Imagine yourself in the finest degree of peace. Relax the noise of a pandemic. Relax the stress of having little or being without. Give oneself the grace. This is my own way of talking to myself. Give myself the grace of occupying the light, the restorative power of nature. Let me close here. This is just speculation, but one of the most central words of my soul, so to speak, is found in the Buddhist tradition known as Nibbana. There's multiple meanings, but it is often seen and expressed as the ultimate arrival of freedom within form and consciousness. It's often associated with enlightenment. Another more intimate way for me in which I look at it is the experiential, I spoke about it yesterday, the experiential immediacy of the felt textures inherent in sensory phenomena. And bringing the state of mind known as unconditioned, the unconditioned eyes that kiss and hold and touch and love without grasping, a dynamic flow of intelligence that realistically aligns with the complexity perceived through the senses. And we're in a dance, we're in a flow, we're in a nibbana movement where there isn't clinging or fear or need or judgment or stress or anxiety. And down deep inside of inner beingness, we are relaxing even the more primordial forms of attachment and fear and stress to living, breathing, dying, or holding. It's the absolute absence of holding or grasping, nibbana. And there's something in that, I call it existential breath work, if you will, where you're oxygenating the finest organs of your own existential body. I do believe we have multiple identities, multiple bodies, physical, spiritual, psychological, emotional, existential, post-existential, pre-existential, integrated, post and pre-existential, subatomic, call it what you will, post-quantum physics, who knows what, how to even describe the numismatic fabric of shared space. And that unconditional occupation, restorative trust in existential frequency, in nature, trusting in nature, not healing, trusting that you are held in the hands of the goddess of timelessness. Enlightenment. What is enlightenment? The living, breathing oxygenation of enlightenment as a multidimensional, non-central phenomenology of purity in action that flows and moves with the grace of non-attachment. That's so rad for me. To bring that level of intelligence as a felt oxygenated reality to the forefront of my breathing, to my communication especially with myself, be true to thyself, but also in context, walking. And how to be super sensitive to configurations or textures of experience that distort. There's something so cool to protect one's mind at the most immediate level of invasion, of the hallucination of fear, the hallucination of stress, the hallucination of violation, the hallucination, real as it may be, of anger. And there's something about self-accountability in to go deeper and deeper and deeper, not letting any of these configuration, these hindrances, these textures that create contracting states that bring conflict and narrowness and contortion and false obedience and forms of slavery to self in speech, thought, and action. And we behave in these odd ways that lead towards our own denigration. How to study those textures in such a way, I refuse to participate them. I'm going to bring nibbana, unconditional, courageous, intelligent, mindful, non-participation in conflict, stress, dukkha. I'm going to live in the world of the phenomenology insight of radical impermanence, walking down the beach with 10 gazillion trillion sand granules without centrality. And I stopped and looked at the waves and the rainbow and the birds and the sun and the sky and the photons and the clouds and all these molecules without center. Abiding in insight, abiding in the reality of nature, nibbana. How to bring nibbana into the mind and body process as a living Dharma experience rather than a practice to achieve something in the future. How to live in the more unconditional dance with a partner on a dance floor of time and space. How to move more freely. How to take the stress out of your mind. Stop. Cease identifying with it happening to you. Reduce the attachment to subjectivity. Nature. Walking through nature this morning. Nature is not happening to someone. It looks that way from a hallucination point of view, of an individual point of view. But if we relax that hostility of separation, it just goes right through you. Everything was going right through me, like it's going right through us right at this moment. The light, the air in my lungs, the blood in my body, the sand granules of time, the molecules of consciousness and form could just die right there on the beach, and all of a sudden, within a month or two, it just disintegrates back into timeless, impermanent conditions without centrality. Abiding in nature, our own true nature, and then some. To close this little riff on my own process, perhaps there's some relevance to you. Something about the word that I've been using for the last 4, 5, 6 years called mindful intelligence. To me, it's the pointing of a set of constituents of consciousness: discernment, reasoning, inquiry, questioning. But I use the word mindful intelligence. It is the intelligence that knows that breathing is required by oneself, done repeatedly, in order to oxygenate and animate the mind and body. Mindful intelligence is the oxygen of freedom, of stresslessness. It must be done by oneself and done repeatedly, like breathing. And in that sense, how well do we oxygenate our spiritual, psychological, emotional body with mindful intelligence, which is able to occupy nature as much as possible based upon the intelligence, stress-free, without anxiety, with ease, no matter what the complexity. The bird moved along the waves, although the dog was chasing it, seemingly impervious to the hostility or the wonderment or the oddity of the dog in all of us wanting to chase, to potentially violate, to follow its own instincts, whatever dog consciousness is there, that looking, running rabbit after that bird just flying along the wave face, and then eventually it just disappeared out over the ocean. It was fearless in going out over the expanse. And there's something about occupying nature, taking that so seriously. In the word mindful intelligence is something so much more compelling to me than being aware. Right now, my mind is operating based upon the conditioning of language and memory. I'm able to draw upon, as you are, words and configurations and narrations and tone and meaning and all the various things that come with the use of language. And then there's the organs and the blood and the breathing, and there's the eyes and the ears. We're all in these multi-intersecting forms of intelligences: biological intelligence, psychological intelligence. The absence of intelligent psychological presence leads one to conflict and suffering, both for oneself and another person. Intelligence implies skillfulness, wisdom, insight, empathy, compassion. Are you employing the constituents of your mindful intelligence to occupy nature realistically, rightly, with freedom, with grace, with the bird in flow on the wave, despite the hostility it moves through time and space, in-breath, out-breath, mindfully intelligent of the inflow and the outflow throughout the day, to give ourselves nature walks wherever we are, inside or outside, eating, talking, thinking, bathing, reclining. The way that we operated within the monastery was that all postures, nothing was too incidental to foster your mindful intelligence. The word intelligence is interesting to me because it brings us right back to release stress, release the anxiety that's self-perpetuated within one's own interior. To have the vocation of self-respect. You know it as well as I do. Rise up in one's dignity, one's courage, one's ethical imperative to bring the best to your own mind and body. Be true to thine own self. By oneself, the Buddha was said to have said, is one defiled. Know what those defilements are, Alan Clements. That is my study. And know equally the freedom from them. By oneself alone, the Buddha was said to have said, is one freed. So from my heart to yours, have a beautiful day. May you live as stress-free as possible. Remember that we always have choice. Anne Frank wrote in her diary that we can quote her to this very second under the most horrific conditions, right? We're in an unimaginable condition on planet Earth today. Yes, yes, yes. It is crazy making. At the same time, rise up. Take yourself to the sacred place of your own heart, soul, mind, and body. Know your Dharma, activate it in the most compelling way, and make peace with your heart. Study the machinations of complexity and anxiety, and give yourself the gift of stresslessness. Give yourself the gift of mindful intelligence. Give yourself the gift of true friendships. Give yourself the gift of the beautification of consciousness. Give yourself the gift of the direct oxygenation of the most beautiful states of mind known to your own consciousness: gratitude, authenticity, compassion. Make real on the promise of these states. Be an artist of your own heart, right? Saying things that are so obvious, but manifest, get real. And as my friend and ally from decades back and I were talking the other day, proactive courage. So rad. Get with the program. Rise up in the fidelity of your own personal dignity, conscience, and grace, and uniquely express your own expression of mindful intelligence, and give the kids a reason to believe in the power of Dharma, the power of dignity, the power of hope, and the future of freedom. So from my heart to yours, thank you, thank you, thank you. May you have a beautiful day. God willing, see you tomorrow here from blessed Maui in the middle of the Pacific, somewhere in infinity. And here we are dancing in this wild nature. Be the bird, glide on that wave and fly. This is how I talk to myself. Hope to see you tomorrow. Thank you.